Hello, welcome to my channel Christian Faith and Fiction. My name's Lou. Today I'm going to share with you some of my recent reads and the books that I've been reading recently. I keep a kind of vlog, as it were, of my book reviews. I just film them as I'm going along. So we're going to have some books for you to look at. Several of those will be Christian fiction ones, which I'll do an in-depth review, and the other ones I'll just give you a brief summary and my ratings. So let's have a look and see how I got on. I finished reading Point of Danger by Irene Hannon. This is the first book in one of the series, a triple threat novel I think it's called, and I gave it a story rating of 8 out of 10 and a faith rating of 2 out of 3, so I've given it 4 stars on Goodreads. It is a Christian contemporary romantic suspense mystery kind of novel. The book follows Eve, who is a radio broadcaster. She has very strong conservative opinions and she doesn't hold back in her opinions on that. And she makes some sort of enemies through that, but then one day she comes home and finds there's a package on her doorstep and she thinks it is a bomb. And the kind of story follows the mystery and suspense of who is targeting Eve. Is it something personal? Is it something to do with her radio program? And the detective involved is investigating that, and there's some attraction between the two of them. He is not at all interested in relationships. He thinks it's dangerous with his job, and he has a past and history to go with that. I enjoyed the writing style. I enjoyed seeing Eve and her sisters particularly. Some of the romance I enjoyed, some of the mystery and suspense I enjoyed. I didn't think it was very likely that a detective police inspector would be allowed to be spending time with a crime victim in more personal time together, like spending time alone together. That didn't seem very professional to me, but you know, kind of have to put that to one side for the purposes of the story. The mystery was okay, but I didn't find it as interesting as the characters themselves. I liked Eve's character. I liked how forthright she was and how outspoken she was. There was some Christian content in the characters were Christians, but this wasn't the main focus of the book. This is the first book that I've read by Irene Hannon, and I enjoyed her writing style, so I would be interested in reading some more about some more of the books she's read in the future. So if you've got any recommendations for her mystery or her romance books, leave them down in the comments. There should be a content warning for this one for emotional or domestic abuse, psychological abuse, that type of thing. It does have one of the point of view characters does involve that. And then I've also read To Win a Prince by Toni Shiloh. This is book 2 in this sort of series. I don't know if it has a name to it, but the first one is following Bree, who finds out she is actually heir to the throne in an African island, and this is her best friend who's also out there, Iris, and it's following her and one of the characters from the first book, and there is a redemption story to his character and his plot. Iris is setting up a business on the island, and she's from America, and she's having to sort of find out what it's like to live there in the culture and what she needs to do in order to set up the business to help the local women there. And she gets this other guy who I'm not going to name because it will spoil some of the things for the book one, but he is got a bad reputation, let's say, and he has to do community service and help her out with the business, and so he's not a Christian to start with, and Iris is very much attracted to him, and a lot of the book is her dealing with being very attracted to somebody who's not a Christian and having to say, you know, having to have that battle of saying, no, I'm not going to get involved unless his faith is involved, but she really wants to be involved. There's a lot of battling backwards and forwards with that. And also you see from his perspective and how he's dealing with events, he starts off quite arrogant and has been living a very privileged lifestyle, and everything sort of starts to get stripped away, and he has to sort of face up to that, and things from his past. There's all sorts of things going on from his past, and he has to face up to the questions about God. And I really enjoyed that part of the story. I enjoyed seeing his story of growing in faith and becoming a better person or a nicer person to be around, and I enjoyed their romance. There was quite a focus at times on the physical aspect of attraction, but there wasn't, it was very clean in terms of what actually was happening. The guy is quite an unlikable character to start with, but I did like him by the end, and I definitely saw where he had come from by the end. And I liked Iris. I always liked her from the first book, and I enjoyed seeing her and her story progressing. I gave this one 4 stars, 8 out of 10 again, or 8.8 or 8.5 out of 10 for story enjoyment factor, and 3 out of 3 for faith content. And then finally, I've read a couple of mainstream books. Now We Are 6 by A.A. Milne and When We Were Very Young by A.A. Milne. These are 2 books of poetry aimed at kids. I liked When We Were Very Young more than the other one, so I gave that one 4 stars, and I gave Now We Are 6 3 stars. Some of the poems were quite sweet, and some of them were a bit dull, from my opinion. I think I was listening to the audiobook, so it just wasn't, maybe it just wasn't the same without the illustrations there to look at. I finished listening to The Wizard of Oz by Frank E. Baum. This is a nostalgic book for me. I remember the film from the past. I starred in it as one of the good witches when I was a child. So I've never read the book before, so most of it's quite similar to the film, except for the ending is quite a bit longer in the book. As a child, I just thought of it as a fairy story. As an adult looking at it now, not sure what I feel about Good Witches or the title of Good Witches. I wish it was really called A Good Fairy, because that's kind of how I thought of it when I was younger. The term Good Witch, I think, could be confusing to people now in terms of promoting witchcraft as being a good thing, so not sure what I feel about that. Let me know in the comments actually what you think about that sort of thing, and whether you just see it as a fairy story or whether you see it as problematic. And today I want to share with you my book review for the book The Words We Lost by Nicole Deese. This is a Christian contemporary romance novel. I requested this book through NetGalley because I've heard a lot of good things about Nicole Deese's writing from other booktubers here, and I wanted to try one of her books, and this one sounded like it's really interesting, so I requested it through NetGalley, and Bethany House very kindly let me have an advanced ebook copy for free to read and review. The story follows Ingrid, who is an editor at a publishing house, and she has a best friend who has been publishing her books with her. She's a writer. Unfortunately, she passed away, and she was in the middle of writing a fantasy series. So 4 books have been published, but the 5th book was never found, so it's sort of missing. And Ingrid is finding, because of her grief, that her brain is not functioning so well. She's getting what I would call brain fog. That's something that I suffer from myself, but not from grief, from a chronic illness. But she's struggling to process words. It's affecting her job, and so she gets this ultimatum given to her basically by her boss, saying either you go retrieve this missing manuscript or you're going to lose your job. In order to go and retrieve this manuscript, though, she has to go back to the hometown where she spent a lot of her childhood, where this other writer, Cece, lived and died, and where her family lives, and where also Ingrid's ex-boyfriend is living. And she's got to face up to a lot of memories. She has to sort of come to terms and face up to the pain and grief that she's been carrying, which she's been refusing to deal with. And so it's quite a heavy topic, definitely very heavy on the grief. Lots of people there are grieving, and yeah, it was a heavier book in that sense, but Nicole Deese did a really good job of balancing out the intense emotional times with some lighter times, some friendships, the sort of lighter side of romance as well, and lighter events that are going on. Although this is a contemporary romance, I think the main story for me was really Ingrid's inner journey and the journey that she takes through her memories and processing her emotions and growing in that and having to deal and face up to the grief that she's carrying. The outer plot was also good as well. There's some mysteries that are involved in that and some revelations that take place through the book that sort of you get as you're going along, and that really held the story together. The characters in the book, several of them are Christians. It's very obvious that they are, and their faith is part of their lives. But the main point of the book is really sort of the emotional part of them rather than spiritual. But it is there, and it is obvious. Overall, I thought it was very well written, and I was really emotionally invested in the characters. Definitely a very good contemporary book. Content warnings, I would say the obvious one is for grief and the death of a loved one. So I gave my story enjoyment rating of this book 10 out of 10. Definitely was worth reading. Definitely was worth sort of pushing through and reading that sort of heavier content, which I don't normally read. I thought it was really, really well written. And the Christian faith rating of 2 out of 3. So I started reading Vivid by Ashley Bustamante. But I decided it wasn't going to be for me. I read a couple of chapters. The magic system is to do with like colour, which I thought would be fine. I thought I'd enjoy it. But it also involves them saying spells, and I just associate that word spells a lot with witchcraft. And as I've said about The Wizard of Oz, sort of in two minds about that one, I sort of was feeling a little uncomfortable about it because I just have such a strong connection in my mind with that. So I decided not to read that one. And then I finally finished reading The Mystery of Edwin Drood. I listened to this one fairly quickly, actually, on audiobook. I have the book as well in a kind of collection of books. It is the final book that Charles Dickens wrote, but he never finished it because he died partway through, so it's only a half of a novel, and it's left this kind of mystery behind because nobody knows exactly how it was going to end or how he would have ended it if he had lived to finish the book, because he didn't really leave any notes, and there are sort of things that he's left, things that he said to other people that people have tried to piece together, and from what was in the book there's different theories on it. So it was a shame. I actually enjoyed the book. I enjoyed the sort of satirical nature of it. I always love his comedy parts to it. There were some darker bits in it, but not as much as some other books. So I would give it 4 stars, mainly because it didn't finish. It doesn't have an ending. So that's kind of sad. But yeah, I have completed all 15, I think, of his novels now. Taken me over 20 years to do it. Some of them are very long, but I'm glad that I finally made it to the end. His novels are quite often a mixture of comedy and tragedy, lightness and darkness. Some of them are a bit darker than others, some a bit more lighter than others. I love his sort of satirical poking humour sort of poking fun at pompous characters, and he has some really lovely romance bits mixed in, but he also has some very dark parts to his writing. So be aware of that if you're planning on reading any of them. Some of the books, get quite dark and deal with quite dark themes. People die, people commit suicide. There's people have mental health problems. Some people have some horrible careers, like pulling bodies out of the Thames. It's a real mixture of sort of satire, poking fun at people, and dark things. So yeah, but I finished that one. So I have now finished all of them. I don't know if I'm going to read all of his short stories. I think I counted up there about 35 of those. So I'm not sure, but I did the novels. I then finished reading A Gilded Lady by Elizabeth Camden. This is book 2 in the Hope and Glory series. This is following Caroline, who is like the secretary to the First Lady of the United States, and she is helping Ida McKinley, who is married to President McKinley, and she's her job to sort of help her, pacify her, help her run things and do things. She is the sister to Grey, who is in the first book, and don't want to say too much about that because it will spoil the first book, but she was quite an unlikable character in that first book. She continues to be unlikable at times, certainly when she's with her family. I found her quite, like, not so nice to be around, quite vinegary. But the rest of the time, I actually warmed to her, liked her quite a lot. She's quite sassy in what she said. She's very sort of forthright in her opinions sometimes, also quite emotional at times, and cares a lot about her family. And then it's also following Nathaniel, who is part of the Secret Service, who's been tasked with keeping the president secure and making sure that everything is done properly. And so he's a big sort of stickler for keeping to the rules, and kind of aggravates people in the White House. But he has this job to fulfill, and he's desperate to make sure that the president is kept safe. They are kind of thrown together through the course of the book. They're she was a bit of a rebel, but now has sort of made good, but still has a kind of some rebel tendencies. And he is a very sort of wanting to do everything by the book, straight down the line sort of person, very involved in his job. There is a mystery surrounding Caroline's family going on as well, and that's one of the reasons why she wants to be in the White House, to try and get some influence and help with that. It is a kind of glamorous society of that time, and sort of all the things that are going on with the White House and the elections and that sort of thing is going on during the book. Those of you who know American history might be able to predict some of the things that happened, but I didn't know anything about it, so I was kind of surprised by some of the stuff that happened. I actually like them as a couple. They've kind of sparked off each other quite a lot, sometimes with sort of chemistry, sometimes just headbutting each other. As I say, she's slightly unlikable at times. The reason I put this book off, reading this book for a while, is because I had a couple of people I'd heard their reviews had said that they didn't like her at all. She was quite unlikable, but actually I liked her a lot more in this one than in the first one, except when she was with her family. Some of the things to do with her family made her quite acidic as a character, but the rest of the time I quite liked her. She's definitely got her flaws and got her sort of backstory of why she is the way she is, and so does Nathaniel. He has, issues and problems as well, but I think it made it more interesting to read. The plot line was a bit meandering, sort of here, there and everywhere. There's the back mystery that goes on, that kind of ties it all together, but the sort of, because it's following real historical events, it's a little bit moving from event to event in some ways. That's why I've given it 4 stars instead of 5 stars. I give it 8.5 out of 10 for story enjoyment rating, and a 2 out of 3 for Christian faith rating. There are definitely Christian elements to this book, Christian characters in the book. It's not the sort of, for the main characters, it's not sort of the main driving thing of the plot, but it does have influence on the plot as they're going along. So 2.5. So those are the books that I've read recently. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of those. Also, let me know if you've read any good books or really terrible books recently in the last month or so, and I'll look forward to chatting with you in the comments. I hope you have a really great reading week, and until next time, God bless. Bye.